may want to get to your first question. I don't know. You may not.
Okay, I'm thinking.
1, 2, 3, 4, testing.
Mm.
It's wrong. You ready?
Am I ready?
Take one part.
Are we ready, dear?
Yeah.
We're ready.
Okay, I'll be a little bit quiet.
I think we're ready.
Hope so.
Okay, here we go.
I have the privilege today of talking to Helen Willard, who is well known in the occupational therapy field, both nationally and internationally. And I thank you very much for allowing us into your home. And I really would like you to tell us where we are right now. We're in the Pine Run community. And how long have you been here?
We've been here, we came on the Friday the 13th of February in 1976. And we've been here since that time. We moved in June, actually, for our permanent residence, and then went for 3 months to Vermont, where we have a summer home and a very pleasant refuge from Pine Run when we feel we've had all of it we can stand. And so we have the space in the summer and Pine Run in the winter, and it all is working out very conveniently and nicely. We're enjoying it.
Are you from Vermont originally?
Not from Vermont, Connecticut. My family is New England to the core, so that my father was born in Massachusetts, my mother was born in Vermont, and I was born in Connecticut.
And really, you've traveled all over the world, haven't you?
I've been around the world and several other trips to various places, different sections, to the Scandinavian countries, for instance. And in the going around the world, we traveled up and down and back and forth, zigzagging to a considerable extent, and seeing a great many people, a great many occupational therapists, because our principal interest was in seeing occupational therapy around the world.
Is there any part of the country that you like specifically?
Let's take it from there.
Okay.
We need a couple more.
Okay. Is there, just for my own information, is there any part of the world that you especially like?
England, more, I think, than anywhere else.
I won't forget. All right, I'll ask you that question, and then I'd like to go into the. And actually, you know, if you look at me, and then also look at the camera straight on while you're answering, and so forth. That's.
Your hands go right now.
Oh God! See, I have a terrible time with that. I talk with my hands. I've done that too.
No, I see nothing on mine.
As I said before, they usually give me the hand mic when we're on location or something, and I have this thing, and it's fine. Except that I play with the chords, and the sound people hear electricity in their ears. It's very
But when he cuts in, it's fine. And
We're going to be in close most of
the
the time.
paisley
Anyway.
looks nice.
What about that pillow over here, that white pillow over
It
here?
doesn't have to show that much.
No, we're not
Doesn't-
gonna-
They're not that far.
We're staying in as tight as we can. Be waist up.
That was made by a friend of ours whose daughters span the wool.
Oh.
She wove it.
Okay, Betty, we're ready. Now you want to pick it up from one of those questions?
Yeah, no, we'll do the pickup of the question. And the question was, what country specifically did you enjoy the most?
You
Okay.
answered the question again. I'll just watch for Mike here. Okay, Mike, are you centered? I'm showing you off right over this.
I'm centered here.
Don, move horizontal adjustment over on that set. Horizontal hold. Okay, that's it. All right. You're rolling?
In all of your travels around the world, which country did you like the best?
I think Japan probably took the prize because they're so different and they're so beautiful in so many different ways. And we were there for a little bit longer time than in some of our other stops, and so saw quite a bit of it and were very graciously received and shown the things that they wanted us most to see or the things that we wanted to see. And therefore we had an outstanding visit, I think, in Japan. And I would put it at the top of the foreign countries to which we went.
And you visited occupational therapy departments in all of these countries. When you visited them, what was it that you were looking for especially?
We were looking for ways, for their ways, to see how they were doing it and what they were doing. They almost always, in most of the countries to which we went, the people had a certain amount of inferiority complexes as to what they were doing in occupational therapy. In other words, were they doing something right? And they were following our plan to such an extent that sometimes we thought it was almost too much, that they might develop ways and means of their own that would be better for them than to try to take ours and adapt ours to them. So that we tried to help them to see where they might add something to their own particular programs. And it could really feel that it was their progress rather than something that they had gotten from us.
Did they use, as you say, they used your plan quite extensively, and then you had to perhaps convince them that they should do their own uniqueness?
Yes, without trying to show them those things that they had that were perhaps better excuse me, than something that we were doing. We began to feel rather self-conscious and almost embarrassed in some cases by feeling that they really were doing something that was so good that they ought to consider it a real bit of progress and something they had contributed.
Your background is in physical therapy as well. Can you tell us a little bit about your education?
Well, in the first place, just briefly, I was graduated from Wellesley College, and then that was I graduated in 1915, and that was very promptly involved with World War I. My principal desire was to get into war service as rapidly as I possibly could. So I found out physical therapy as the thing that was being emphasized at the moment, and I went to New Haven. In fact, my nephew was living in New Haven at the time, and I heard about the New Haven Normal School of Gymnastics and that they were giving a course in physical therapy. I signed up for the course with the director of the school looking very dubious as to my qualifications for it. First, I was a week late in getting to the school, and it was only, I think it was a 5 weeks course, so I was the first week late, but I managed to make that up, and so went on with the program and was graduated as a full-fledged physical therapist at the end of the course, which was what I wanted because it gave me the opportunity to get into Army service. That was my principal goal in life at that time. And then in getting into Army service, I discovered occupational therapy. They were at Robert Breck Brigham Hospital in Boston, and I found first that there was a physical therapy department there, to which I belonged, but the occupational therapy department began to interest me more. And as soon as I possibly could do it, I began to take craft courses that would give me the skills that I would use in occupational therapy.
Why did occupational therapy interest you? What was it about it that you thought was interesting?
I think the variety of it, the wide scope of it, which is one of its greatest difficulties as well as one of its greatest virtues. I was more or less in at the beginning of much of what they were doing too, so that it was a matter of learning together and seeing what the problems were and trying to meet those problems as well as we comfortably could, or as well as we adequately could. So that in both instances, both with physical therapy and occupational therapy, there was very much the feeling that here were two professions that were relatively new and were working together and yet were very different. And actually, as I began to see the two working together, my interest swung over to occupational therapy rather than physical therapy. It was more according to my particular interests and tastes, and it seemed to me a very effective and a very interesting way of working with disabled persons.
After you became an occupational therapist as well as a physical therapist, what was your first job as a therapist? Can you?
I'm not sure that I can tell in time. My first job as physical therapist was at Robert Breck Brigham Hospital. Then I got into Camp Meade, Maryland, and I was moved very rapidly from place to place so that I would be in one place only a few months, and then went on. And I can't remember at the moment the sequence of all
Right.
of those, but they fairly well covered the waterfront.
But it was in the Army service that
Yes,
you...
it was
you-
Army service. And then specifically and definitely in occupational therapy.
How did you get involved in the association activities?
Well, I heard of them. I think I joined the American Occupational Therapy Association in 1922. I'm not sure whether that was the first year that it had a conference in Atlantic City or not, but I know it was very young in its actual organization at that time. So that I was in it almost from the beginning, and again was interested in what was being done and how it was being done and what might be developing from whatever stance it had in the beginning. And so I actually saw a good deal of the original founding and launching of occupational therapy.
And you knew many of the founders and the launchers of occupational therapy. And what were they really like? You know, we have the Eleanor Clark Slagle lecture
Yes.
now, and one wonders what she was like.
Well, she was a very beautiful woman in many ways. She was I don't think pretty was really the word for it. She was really beautiful. She was a woman of distinction, very highly a lady, but with a tremendous force in her general ability. If she undertook a thing, it was sure to be done. And she would tackle a situation even when it seemed almost impossible. She still would deal with it. And really, I think, contributed more than we've actually realized to the real establishment of occupational therapy. She gave of herself unstintingly. She was always interested in progress and anything could be done. She gave her service for not one penny of pay for years, and was just as interested carrying another job at the same time, carrying a real job at the same time. She was just as interested in what could be done in occupational therapy. So that I don't think we've ever fully appreciated how much she did contribute.
What other job did she carry? Can you recall?
She was, I can't name it exactly, but it was connected with New York State, and it was a prominent job. It was like being the head of occupational therapy in New York State.
Who are some of the other ones that you remember particularly?
Well, there were a good many. There was one who is not, she still is living, but is not particularly known for her connection with occupational therapy, and that was Mrs. Marion Beatty. She was a very good friend of mine. We were extremely close friends, and she was prominent in occupational therapy, trying to establish it, trying to develop it, and was a strong force in it. She again was a very not actually predominating woman, but one with a good deal of force and a good deal of strength, and yet at the same time doing it gently and so in so tactful a way that her efforts to make a change or to develop something were helped by her general attitude.
Many of the founders of the association or the profession were really not occupational therapists, were they?
Most of them were not. That is, there was Mr. Kidner, who came from Canada and had had a great deal to do with occupational therapy developing in Canada, and also his interests in England and developments there, so that he was aware of the possibilities of the spread of occupational therapy throughout the world. And there were several other men, mostly men. There were only a few women actually involved in the early days of occupational therapy. And I can't at the moment recall their names, but perhaps they'll come to me more as we talk about it.
Did you find that as a young person in the profession, and certainly in the association, that you were given the freedom and allowed a voice in the things that were going on, or did you have a problem with that?
I think I would say that I had a problem with that because I was probably young and bumptious enough to annoy a good many people and to have them feel that here was a little upstart who didn't really know anything about occupational therapy and what was she doing in it. So that I recognized in later years that I probably wasn't as tactful as I might have been in my approach. But sometimes I think it was because I had the feeling that the thing must be done, and I went at it with too much force, and it didn't act in a tactful enough way, letting the persons with whom I was trying to deal feel that it was all their work that was being promoted. I wasn't interested in what anybody thought of what I did or anything of that sort, but I did want to do what I could. So probably I blundered around to a considerable extent in trying to find what I really could do.
What advice would you give some of the students today about this? There seems to be a characteristic in the leadership and the founders that there is this desire to get something done, particularly if you believe in it. And what advice would you have for some of the younger leadership coming in?
Well, I think I advised them to go on and cope with the things that they felt were important and put their strength into developing them, helping them as much as possible, and keeping out of as much trouble themselves as I could.
At one point, you knew mostly everybody in the association, didn't you?
Yes, I think I knew practically all of the original members. There was one other college graduate. I think there were just two of us who were college graduates. And that was both our strength and our difficulty in some cases, because many people didn't felt that we were more highly educated than they were, and that we were a bit too likely to show what we felt we should do. And there were some problems in that sort of situation that came into the picture.
You know, we are celebrating in the profession our 60th anniversary. It is still predominantly a woman's profession, and yet all of you years ago did some of the things that we're now calling being liberated. What is your feeling about the fact of discrimination in the profession? Did you ever feel any of that as you worked with all the associations around the world and in this country?
No, I felt that they were all working for the same purpose, and some were on a higher level of accomplishment, and others were not, and were building up to it. But I felt that on the whole, there was a considerable actual relationship and coordination among all the different groups. They were all anxious to know what the other one was doing and what they could do to improve what they were trying to do.
One of the difficulties is explaining what occupational therapy is about. How do you feel about a change in the name of occupational therapy, or how do you feel we should explain it?
Well, it has always, to me, been a problem that should be solved, because we should be able to define ourselves more clearly than we do. Unfortunately, we have never yet, in all of the time we've had to work on it, and on all the days and the time that we've spent on it, we still have not been able to define it with what we feel is a satisfactory definition. So that I feel that I don't think we should change the name. I think that would, to a certain extent, cancel out a great deal of what we've done. But we still have got to find some way of defining it, of being able to tell people what it really is. We who are practicing it are highly proud of it, are ready to recognize and to promote every good thing that we can find in regard to it, and cut out the bad things as we can find them. And yet we still do not fully describe or easily describe what we're trying to do, and therefore we get into great confusion of comprehension by the persons to whom we are trying to explain.
In the past few years, we have said that possibly one method of explanation would be to say that the occupational therapy has basic principles under which all occupational therapists function. And then you go into your specialty area, if you work in geriatrics or with mental health or whatever, and would explain it from that point of view. How do you feel about that?
Well, I think one of our greatest problems is the the diversity of occupational therapy. We are one thing in one type of condition. For instance, in psychiatric work, the occupational therapist is a person who is actively involved, and yet in physical disabilities we are just as much involved from a completely different point of view. So that you can look at you even have to look at occupational therapy from half a dozen or more different angles, seeing what it does, seeing how widespread it is, how important it can be in many different disabilities, with the one aim and desire to be able to give in occupational therapy the highest and the finest type of treatment that we can. We're struggling to adapt to completely different conditions which have to be treated by the same modalities. And when we're in that situation, what happens? Does something go out the window and something else come in? Or what change should we make in our approach? And then in the actual treatment that we give to such a wide variety of patients. Some other groups don't have as wide a variety as we do. And therefore we're spreading ourselves thin, more or less, most of the time.
All right, I think we can talk about that in just a second when we come back. Okay.
Well,
That
I
was
want you to
nice.
take a break because the tape's going to run out and I didn't want it to run out.
Right, fine.
Apologize, just a break.
Okay,
You don't have to announce it. So you just edit it.
okay, fine.